Welcome. It's a Monday, and that means it's the time to kickstart the week by taking a look at what's happening in the world of business on Mansfield today. And our business expert is Chris Gibbons, as usual. Chris, good morning to you. We start with two big stories today. One is local, one's international. At first glance, they don't appear to be linked, but they are. We'll come to that in a moment. Let's start with the local one. This relentless rise of the rand.
Good morning, Jeremy. Yes, absolutely. The rand is the emerging markets powerhouse at the moment. I'll tell you exactly where we are as we speak. We've got a rand against the dollar at 13.45, 16.35 against the euro, and against the British pound, bang on the button, 19 to the rand. And a little earlier this morning, it dipped beneath 19. That's the first time, according to my records, that we've seen it go beneath 19 since to the pound since January of last year, long before the pandemic actually started. So the rand is doing extremely well. Why is the question? Well, let's just recap some of the numbers. It's a risk-on thing as people look around the world for yield. You know, you're in the bond market, for example, in the United States, and bond yield over there 1.6%, 1.65%. Whereas over here at the moment, and I'll give you the current price on the South African government 10-year bond, we are looking at 8.77 at the moment. So you're getting 6 points the difference, 7 points the difference between what our bonds are yielding and what the Americans are yielding. So people are moving into South African bonds because they want that yield.
Why is the dollar weakening though? Because I mean, it's dropped what 2 cents against the euro in the last week, I think.
Indeed, it has. There are various factors, I think, which can cause the US dollar to weaken. But this time around, after a very good start to the year, it's all about, as I said, declining yields on US treasuries. Those, in turn, are falling because of fears about inflation, the big I word, inflation. Now, central banks around the world have been injecting what they call easy money, quantitative easing, into their economies to help get us through the pandemic, as they did after the great crisis of 2008. Buying up huge amounts of bonds makes money very, very easy to get hold of, and the markets really love that. But you add some inflation into it, because with all the money sloshing around the place, inflation is a real threat, as people start to get really nervous about that. Now, last week, we had one of the senior players in the US Federal Reserve System, the Philadelphia Fed, suggesting that now might be the time to turn the easy money taps off, to start a debate about when to taper the program. There's that taper word. You may recall 2013, the taper tantrum, when suddenly everybody panicked because the easy money tap was going to be turned off. We had a hint of that this week, so the dollar dropped, and that's why we saw that 2 cent movement. But that brings us back to the South African rand, because even though our bond yields are coming down, we were at middle of April, we're 9.3, 9.4, we're now 8.7, as I said a moment ago. Compared with that 1.65% in the US, we're still hell of attractive compared to many other countries. As I say, foreigners are buying in. That's creating demand for the rand, and in turn, that's pushing the currency higher. How much higher? Well, that, I think, is the billion-dollar question. I have seen one forecast, Jeremy, which says the rand could go as high as 11 to the dollar. But think about a pendulum. You know, a pendulum swings at the pivot point, nothing much happens. But down here, the pendulum really does swing quite wildly. We're at the far end because we're an emerging market currency, because we're perceived to be high risk. When we swing one way, it's terribly dramatic. The rand crashes 19, 20, 21 to the dollar. When it swings the other way, it comes back 13, 12, 11 maybe to the dollar. So think pendulum. I think where we are at the moment, around 13.50, maybe 13 if we're lucky. That's probably about where we'll settle.
If you do like the show, press like. If you don't like to subscribe, then press the subscribe button. It's Mansfield Today on a Monday. We're talking business. Chris, the international story now, the other big one. I just happened to turn on the TV to Sky News over the weekend and saw a bunch of really, really happy G7 finance ministers, because they'd just concluded, or they'd come to agreement on corporate tax.
A G7 finance minister who is happy. When do you know your finance minister is happy? When they have just agreed to squeeze more taxes out of somewhere. That's exactly what they have agreed to do with this basic corporate tax rate of 15%, not as high as Joe Biden wanted. He was looking for 21%, but it's targeting obviously the big multinationals, and in particular the tech companies, the Facebooks, the Apples, the Googles, those kind of things, because what they've been doing is, and it's all perfectly legal, just as you and I are allowed to organize our affairs in a way to minimize the amount of tax that we pay, so big companies do exactly the same thing. And they shift revenue, and they shift pricing, and they shift this and shift that. And finally, it winds up in a low tax place like Ireland, 12.5% corporate tax, and they wind up paying very little tax indeed anywhere in the world. Now, a lot of people say that's morally unfair. You need to pay tax in the country where you make those profits. The French have been on this now for a number of years. In fact, last year they imposed a levy on the big tech companies. But now the G7 finance ministers have said, right, let's make a start at this. Let's try and change the system. We will now either levy or tax these big companies in the countries where they make the profits, not where they book the profits, but where they actually make the revenue. And that, I think, is it's a sea change in the way tax is going to be viewed. And I use the word avoidance. Remember, avoidance is legal, evasion is illegal. And what the big companies have been doing is blurring the line between the two. You and I would never do anything like that. We are allowed to avoid. Evasion, of course, is strictly illegal, and SARS will come and get you. But a lot of people are saying, well, you know what? Evasion is illegal, but avoidance is also immoral. You need to pay your fair share of taxes just like everybody else. And that's what they've agreed.
Is it going to affect businesses in South Africa, Chris?
That's a good question, Jeremy. I think we will get on board from the G7. They're going to take it to the G20, the G20 group of slightly less exalted nations, of which we happen to be a member. And I cannot see the G20 not endorsing it. I mean, our government in particular, desperate for revenue, absolutely squeezing the lemons till the pips squeak and then squeezing them again. So if there's a possibility of getting some more dosh out of the Googles and the Facebooks, we will absolutely leap at it. Bear in mind one thing, though, this is a start. And to get a big international treaty like this working through the system, everybody buys in, everybody's on board. I mentioned Ireland, 12.5%. The Irish are already saying, well, yes, we'll have a look at this. We'll have a look at this and we'll back our minds up, but it all has to be fair for everybody. The Irish don't sound very happy about this at all because they've done very well out of this system. Yeah. So it's going to take time to put in place. It's going to take time to get everyone on board. But yes, I think we will definitely back it.
It's got a totally different story here. There are two others that I'd like to touch on very briefly. South Africa, it looks like it could have built its last coal-fired power station.
Yes, absolutely right. The North Gauteng High Court has just ruled that a 600 megawatt coal-fired plant, Khanyisa, has an environmental permit which has expired. It cannot go ahead without the permit, and the environmentalists who brought the case to court originally are saying, that's it. Khanyisa is done. It will never be built now, backed by Saudi Arabians. And this goes with the cancellation of a coal-fired station called Thabametsi, and that goes back to a court case in 2017, which came to fruition at the end of last year. Thabametsi also been killed because the permits aren't right. And now to get one of these permits, you have to really do a very extensive process, which involves examining climate change and the impact that your new coal-fired power station is going to have on climate change. And throw into the fact that none of our banks, none of our big banks are now lending to any new coal-fired power stations. And I think that we have built our last coal-fired power station.
The other one, I thought Concorde was dead and buried, but it seems like Supersonic travel is back with us, or maybe.
Absolutely. Did you ever fly Concorde?
No, I never flew. I'm far too large to even fit into Concorde.
Well, I was going to say, I never flew it. I had actually been in one at an aircraft museum in the UK, and I was surprised by just how small it really was inside, and you pay fantastic prices back in those days. But yes, we're talking about an airplane called the Overture from a company called Boom Technologies, and America's United Airlines has just ordered 15 of these aircraft at $200 million a piece to begin flying in 2029. 88 seated passengers, and it's about flying over oceans, because you're not allowed to go supersonic over land in the United States. Europe, pretty much the same thing. So what are we talking about? We're talking about Newark, New Jersey to London, 3.5 hours. San Francisco, Tokyo in 6 hours. and flying at 60,000 feet, probably ordinary aircraft at the moment, 40,000, so well above where ordinary aircraft go. 200 million is the price ticket, as I say. What the prices for a seat on this aircraft are going to be, I don't know. The important thing about this is United Airlines has actually put cash on the drumhead. Japan Airlines and Richard Branson's Virgin Group, they have placed pre-orders, but no cash yet. So United is out in front of this one. I guess, will this thing be successful or not? Because Concorde was eye-wateringly expensive to run, eye-wateringly expensive to maintain, and as I said, very, very expensive to fly on. So I think it's going to be boom, can it beat Zoom? Because in this day and age, we do a lot more Zoom than we do flying. That's boom or true. Zoom, we'll find out.
Yeah. Finally, before I let you go, looking ahead, we could see a public sector strike next week.
The whisper is that it's going to start, the rumbling will start this week, Jeremy. And don't forget that it's the same unions that are involved at ESCOM, and that process is about 10 days behind the public sector process. So we could be staring down a strike in the public sector and, more or less simultaneously, a strike at ESCOM. And that, may I venture to suggest, is exactly what we do not need at the moment. 1.5% on the table from the government to the PSA, 1.5% from ESCOM to the unions over there. At ESCOM, they're demanding 15% in an inflationary environment of 4.5%. It's just insanity. Sooner or later, and we said this back in 1994, when the unions went into government, went into coalition with the ANC, at some point there is going to be a showdown between government and the trade unions, just as there was back in Margaret Thatcher's times against the mine workers. I think now the public sector and ESCOM, the trade unions versus the government, I think that moment is approaching.
For your insight, thank you very much. Our business journalist, Chris Gibbons, who joins us here on Mansfield Today every Monday to take a look at the markets and what they're doing. Chris, have a good week. We'll catch up with you again next Monday.
Thanks, Jeremy. Take care.
And we'll catch up with you tomorrow with Advocate Lance Brogden. We'll be talking matters legal. As I said earlier, if you do like the show, then press the like button. And if you'd like to subscribe, then press the subscribe button. Until next time around, cherry bye.
There's so much you can show me.